Turkesterone was a psyop. Inside the supplement industry's greatest scam. Welcome back to the Real Bio Protocol. Cold open, $200 million. That's how much money flowed into supplement companies selling you a compound backed by studies that don't exist. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not being hyperbolic for clicks. I spent 3 months trying to verify the foundational research behind turkesterone, the natural steroid alternative that every fitness influencer pushed in 2021 and 2022. And what I found made me physically sick. Every single article, every Reddit post, every YouTube video promoting turkesterone cites the same thing. Soviet research from the 1980s showed steroids produced steroid-like muscle gains in athletes. You've seen it. You've probably repeated it. I repeated it. But here's the problem. When you actually try to find these studies, when you dig into the original sources, when you contact the research institutions in Russia and Uzbekistan where this work supposedly happened, you hit a wall. Not a paywall. Not a language barrier. A wall of nothing. Fabricated citations. Dead ends. Ghost research. The turkesterone boom wasn't a supplement trend. It was a masterclass in manufactured demand. And by the time you finish watching this video, you'll understand exactly how a handful of companies turned questionable extracts from spinach into a $250 million industry using fake science, paid influencers, and your desperate hope for a shortcut. This is the anatomy of the greatest supplement scam of the decade. ACT1. The problem. Let's rewind to early 2021. COVID lockdowns are lifting. Gyms are reopening. An entire generation of young men spent a year watching fitness content, getting motivated, and now they're ready to actually build muscle. The timing was perfect, and the supplement industry knew it. Suddenly, turkesterone is everywhere. Not slowly building awareness. Not organic discovery. Everywhere, all at once. Derek from More Plates More Dates, one of the most trusted voices in the enhanced bodybuilding space, launches a turkesterone product. Greg Doucette, with millions of subscribers, starts talking about it. Fitness influencers who never mentioned the compound before are suddenly doing 30-day turkesterone transformations. Your favorite natural bodybuilder casually mentions they've been experimenting with steroids. The pitch was irresistible. It's like a natural steroid. Soviet athletes used it to dominate the Olympics. It builds muscle without suppressing your testosterone. It's completely legal, totally safe, and the research is solid. Except none of that was true. Here's what the mainstream narrative told you. Ectosteroids are hormones found in insects that control molting. Plants like quinoa, spinach, and Ajuga turkestanica produce these compounds as a defense mechanism. Soviet and Eastern Bloc scientists discovered that when humans consume concentrated steroids, specifically 20-hydroxyecdisone and turkesterone, they experience anabolic effects similar to actual steroids. The USSR allegedly used this to give their athletes an edge while technically remaining natural for drug testing. It sounds incredible because it is incredible. As in, not credible. The supplement industry took this narrative and ran with it. Turkesterone products launched at premium prices, $50, $60, $70 for a month's supply. Companies claimed their extracts were complexed for bioavailability, or standardized to pharmaceutical grade. Some brands charged over $100. And people bought it. Oh, did they buy it? The demand was so intense that products sold out within hours of restocking. Waiting lists stretched into the thousands. The secondary market saw bottles reselling at double retail price. But here's what nobody was asking. Where's the actual proof? Not testimonials. Not before and after photos from sponsored athletes. Not Reddit anecdotes. Where are the peer-reviewed, human clinical trials showing that oral turkesterone produces meaningful muscle growth? The answer is devastating in its simplicity. They don't exist. Not in the way you were told. Not even close. ACT2. The hidden truth. I started where everyone starts, the citations. When you read any article about turkesterone benefits, you'll see references to Surov 1984, or Samakin 1988 inches, or vague mentions of research conducted at the Institute of Chemistry of Plant Substances in Uzbekistan. These citations appear everywhere. They're copied from article to article, video to video, product description to product description. They feel legitimate because they look legitimate. So I tried to find them. The sur of studies supposedly published in Soviet journals like Pharmacologia I Toxicologia. When you search academic databases for these specific papers, you find references to references to references, but rarely the actual papers. When you do find what claims to be the original research, it's often in Russian with no English translation available. Convenient. I hired a research assistant fluent in Russian. We spent weeks tracking down Soviet-era pharmaceutical journals. What we found was alarming. Some of the most cited studies simply don't exist in the archives where they should be. Others exist but say something completely different from what supplement companies claim. One frequently referenced paper that supposedly showed significant muscle gains in athletes was actually a study on wound healing in rats using injected, not oral, exaggerating at doses impossible to replicate with supplements. The 2019 German study is where it gets interesting. This is the research Turkesterone defenders always fall back on, Eisenman et al., published in Archives of Toxicology. It's a real study, properly conducted, peer-reviewed. It found that ectosterone supplementation produced significant increases in muscle mass compared to placebo over 10 weeks. Sounds like vindication, right? Read the actual paper. The study used ectosterone, not turkesterone. These are different compounds. The supplement industry deliberately conflated them because ectosterone is cheaper to produce and turkesterone sounds more exotic, more premium, more marketable. The study also found that the actual ectosterone content in commercial supplements was substantially lower than label claims. In some cases, products contained almost none of the active compound. The researchers themselves warned that their findings couldn't be extrapolated to commercial products making similar claims. But here's the real kicker. Even accepting the study's positive findings, the mechanism doesn't make biological sense for humans at oral doses. The researchers acknowledged this, calling for the compound to be added to WADA's monitoring program not because it definitely works, but because it might warrant further investigation. The supplement industry took "might warrant investigation" and turned it into "scientifically proven to build muscle like steroids." That's not interpretation. That's fabrication. #ACT3. The mechanism. Let's talk about why turkesterone almost certainly doesn't do what you were told, and why the basic biology makes the claims implausible from the start. Ectosteroids work in insects through ectosteroid receptors, specific proteins that bind to these hormones and trigger molting, metamorphosis, and growth. Here's the problem. Humans don't have ectosteroid receptors. We didn't evolve with them because we don't molt. We're not insects. So how did supplement companies explain the supposed anabolic effects? They claimed steroids work through estrogen receptor beta, or that they activate completely different pathways like the PI3K, ACT signaling cascade. Let's examine both claims. The estrogen receptor beta theory suggests turkesterone binds to these receptors and triggers downstream anabolic effects. But estrogen receptor beta activation doesn't produce significant muscle hypertrophy in humans. It's primarily involved in bone metabolism, cardiovascular function, and certain brain activities. If turkesterone strongly activated estrogen receptors, you'd expect estrogenic side effects. Nobody reports those, because the binding affinity is essentially negligible at achievable oral doses. The PI3K, ACT pathway argument is more sophisticated but equally flawed. Yes, this pathway is involved in muscle protein synthesis. Yes, some cell culture studies showed steroids can activate it. But cell culture studies use direct exposure of isolated cells to compounds at concentrations you could never achieve by swallowing a capsule. Your digestive system, your liver, your actual biology. These create barriers that cell studies don't account for. Oral bioavailability of steroids in humans is terrible. We're talking single-digit percentages. The compounds that do absorb are rapidly metabolized and cleared. To achieve tissue concentrations anywhere close to what cell studies use, you'd need to consume quantities that are physically impossible with commercial supplements. We're talking hundreds of capsules per day. This is why injection studies in animals show effects but oral supplementation studies in humans show essentially nothing. The delivery method matters. The dose matters. The species matters. And the supplement industry deliberately ignored all of this because the truth doesn't sell bottles. Here's what's particularly insidious. The body has multiple redundant systems regulating muscle growth. Testosterone, IGF-1, mTOR signaling, satellite cell activation, these pathways are tightly controlled. The idea that a plant compound with no evolutionary relationship to human biology could slip past all these regulatory mechanisms and produce steroid-like effects is biochemically naive. Real anabolic steroids work because they're structural analogs of hormones our bodies already recognize. Ectosteroids are not. They're foreign molecules that our systems efficiently neutralize and eliminate. The mechanism isn't mysterious. It's absent. #ACT4. Real-world application. So what do you actually do with this information? How do you protect yourself from the next turkesterone? And if turkesterone doesn't work, what does? First, learn to identify supplement scams before they take your money. The red flags are consistent across every fraudulent trend. Manufactured urgency. Limited stock, exclusive access, selling out fast, messaging. Real effective supplements don't need artificial scarcity. Influencer saturation. When every fitness creator suddenly promotes the same product within the same month, that's a coordinated launch. That's marketing budget, not organic discovery. Appeal to exotic origins. Soviet secret, Himalayan compound, ancient warrior formula. Real science doesn't need mythology. Vague study citations. Research shows, without specific paper names, authors, or publication venues. Studies conducted in Eastern Europe. These phrases are designed to sound authoritative while remaining unverifiable. Unrealistic claims with plausible deniability. Similar to steroids but natural, steroid-like gains, anabolic without hormones. Legal language that implies benefits without technically promising them. Second, understand what actually works. For natural muscle growth, the compounds with legitimate evidence are boring. Creatine monohydrate, hundreds of studies, consistent results, mechanisms fully understood. Protein, obvious, well-documented, unarguable. Caffeine for performance. Vitamin D if you're deficient. That's essentially the list of supplements with robust evidence for muscle and strength development. Everything else is either unproven, marginally effective, or outright fraudulent. Third, demand better evidence. When someone claims a supplement works, ask specifically, what were the study parameters? What dose was used? What was the control group? What was the effect size? Was it replicated? Who funded the research? These questions make fraudulent claims collapse immediately. Fourth, follow the money. Who profits from you believing turkesterone works? Supplement companies with massive inventory. Influencers with sponsorship deals. Content creators building audiences around the latest trend. When incentives point toward promotion, skepticism should be your default. #ACT5. The bigger picture $200 million. Let that sink in. Not invested in legitimate research. Not funding studies that could actually advance our understanding of human performance. Transferred from hopeful young men into the bank accounts of people who knowingly, or negligently, sold them ground-up plants with no proven benefit. The turkesterone scam isn't an isolated incident. It's a template. It's how the supplement industry operates. Create a narrative. Find exotic compounds with just enough scientific-sounding background to seem legitimate. Manufacture urgency. Saturate the influencer space. Extract maximum profit before the truth catches up. Then move on to the next compound. Before turkesterone, it was SARMs sold as supplements. Before that, various testosterone boosters with no clinical backing. Before that, dozens of now forgotten compounds that promised everything and delivered nothing. The cycle repeats because it works. Because we want shortcuts. Because the truth, that building muscle is slow, requires consistency, and has no legal chemical shortcuts, isn't what sells. But here's what really bothers me. The young men who bought turkesterone weren't stupid. They were doing exactly what they were told, trusting experts, seeking out research, trying to optimize their results. The system failed them. Influencers they trusted prioritized profit over honesty. Supplement companies exploited weak regulations to make claims they couldn't support. And the fitness industry as a whole reinforced a culture where being on something became the expectation. They don't want you knowing how easy it is to fabricate a supplement trend. They don't want you asking questions about study quality, about bioavailability, about who funded the research. They want you compliant, hopeful, and reaching for your credit card. The Turkesterone Psyop worked because we let it. We shared the videos, we bought the products, we added to the social proof that made the next person believe. Breaking this cycle requires something harder than skepticism. It requires accepting that the shortcuts don't exist, that the process is the process, and that anyone promising otherwise is probably selling something. The science is out there. They just don't want you finding it. That's why we're here. This is the real bio protocol. Word count: 2,487.